Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. My next guest left a steady job in the corporate world to take a stab at entrepreneurship, fueled by her passion for sports. And since then, her and her team have been named to Forbes 30 Under 30. They've been through accelerator programs with Techstars and Facebook, and they oversubscribed their $1 million seed round, all in the name of creating a more prominent female voice in sports.
When you're hearing what's happening in the sports world from your sports-obsessed best friend, it's so much more compelling. It leaves you wanting to know more and really wanting to engage with the sports world more versus I think for myself and Rosalind and for many other women out there, and really just like anyone who's not oftentimes like a really avid white male fan, it doesn't really feel like it's being created for you. So it was really that night with Ellen just like having this infectious passion about the Leafs that really stemmed the concept of the gist. We were like, imagine if we could have Ellen giving us our sports updates.
My guest today is Jacie deHoop, who's co-founder at The Gist. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
So you and I met virtually a couple months back. I was moderating a panel with MLSE Game Changers, and you were on the panel. And I'm sure you get asked to be on panels a lot of the time. You're a young woman who's co-founded a pretty cool company. Can you explain what The Gist is for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, totally. So at The Gist, we are a female-founded sports media startup. We're really all about making sports feel a lot more accessible and a lot more inclusive to really all types of fans, and just making sports feel a little bit less like a boys' club and really making sports feel like they're for everyone. Myself and my co-founders came from a finance background, very like corporate, male-dominated environments, and really saw firsthand how sports is just that one thing that like brings people together like nothing else, brings out this passion in people like nothing else. All of us were athletes when we were younger and saw how many benefits that kind of gave us. But also, unfortunately, sports can still really feel kind of like this exclusive community. And as a female fan, it's really easy to feel on the outside of that community, on the outside of that sports conversation. So we really wanted to create something that was the exact opposite of that boys club mentality. So we launched The Gist in 2018. And again, really with that premise of making sports just feel much more accessible, much more inclusive. So we do that mainly through content, and our right now 3 times weekly newsletter is kind of the main.
I love the newsletter. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It's been kind of our hero product, and is really the main way that we wanted to build up that community and really democratize a lot of sports content too. The key thing with the newsletter as well is that, it gives you the gist of what's going on in the sports world under a 5-minute read. So it's very much so built for a very busy kind of female, but also the key difference being that it's from that female voice and from that female perspective. So we cover what's going on in men's professional sports as well as women's professional sports, equal coverage. If not, we have probably more female coverage. Yeah. And again, it's that female perspective. A huge thing for us was just that the sports content we were consuming and reading about didn't ever feel like it was created with us in mind. And so through that newsletter, we've really built up, again, a more like inclusive kind of community around sports, telling much more progressive storylines as well.
Huge kudos to you and your co-founder. So you guys met at Queen's University, but The Gist didn't come until 2018. So take me back to Queen's and, early conversations there.
Yeah. So we were all friends from Queen's. We actually all played on an intramural soccer team together. We were all in the same program. We were in the business program there as well. So we're friends from college. And then we all moved to Toronto, and we're all kind of working in different areas of financial services. Myself, I was on the management consulting kind of world, and most of my clients being the banks. Again, it was just very, very corporate and very male dominated kind of spaces too. And that was really where the idea for The Gist was born out of. It was literally just one evening, the three of us were kind of catching up over takeout and some wine, and we were talking about sports. And Ellen in particular is just like a crazy avid sports fan. Like, just from being her friend, she's just like always talking about sports and loves it so much. Yeah. And while we were catching up, there was just something about how Ellen was so excited about the Leafs win the night before, and how she just had this really infectious energy around her sports fandom that we were like, when you're hearing what's happening in the sports world from your sports obsessed best friend, it's so much more compelling. It leaves you wanting to know more, and really wanting to engage with the sports world more, versus I think for myself and Rosalind and for many other women out there, and really just like anyone who's not oftentimes like a really avid white male fan. Yeah. It just doesn't seem that interesting, or again, it doesn't really feel like it's been created for you. So it was really that night with Ellen just like having this infectious passion about the Leafs that really stemmed the concept of the gist. We were like, imagine if we could have Ellen giving us our sports updates regularly. Like it would feel just super different. And so really the newsletter, our socials now, our podcasts have really been created with that premise in mind, that it is really compelling. It is really interesting. There are so many amazing things about sports that when you look at it from a bit of a more diverse perspective, it can be much more inclusive, and feel like it really is for you.
Okay. So tell me about leaving a corporate job to start your own business. I imagine that was something.
Yeah. It was a pretty big leap. For all three of us, we've been working for a few years out of school, and we're doing, relatively well at each of our respective places. So it was a pretty big risk for sure. I think, maybe my parents and it can be difficult to kind of make that decision. We are honestly relatively risk averse, even though all three of us are entrepreneurs. And so I think the real catalyst to us actually quitting our jobs and taking that leap was being accepted into an incubator program. So we were accepted to this program with that had some funding from Facebook and was part of the Ryerson DMZ in Toronto. So it came with that funding that was non-dilutive too. It came with mentorship and office space and kind of like this 5-month boot camp.
That's beautiful.
To be a part of. Yeah. And that was really what, we had this opportunity in front of us, and it felt like, to not seize it and to not see what we could do with the gist would just be, it was like honestly a once in a lifetime opportunity. So that was really what, again, was that kind of catalyst that was like, okay, let's do this. So we'd been kind of running the gist as a side hustle, for about 6 months before we actually quit. And at the time it was, just a weekly newsletter. Ellen was writing all of it. Rosalind and I were editing it. Had no place doing so. Like, I'm the worst editor ever. So it was, we really didn't have much. We didn't have much going into that program, but it really did help things take off for us.
The voice of that newsletter is such an important part of like the female perspective, right? So is Ellen still writing it now, by the way?
No, we have a full team. We have a lot of content contributors, editors, fact checkers across the States, across Canada that all contribute to the newsletter.
How many people are on the team now?
We have 8 full-time and about 15 or 20 part-time, with that part-time team being a lot of content folks.
Okay. I want to go back to the question I just asked you, even about leaving your corporate job too. When you were making this decision, did you keep it to yourself? Because, sometimes being in that corporate environment and like sharing an idea with someone and getting feedback that maybe wasn't what you wanted would have changed your mind or anything. How open were you with your coworkers at the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. We were extremely open, actually. I think, and looking back, I do think that's super, super important. I think that there can be this feeling of like, oh, is somebody going to take my idea or what have you? And I think we kind of thought about it in the exact opposite way. We were like, for this to be something, we need to tell as many people as possible. We need to grow the audience as much as possible. And we also wanted to get feedback from as many people as possible and really smart people as well. So that was a lot of our colleagues. So we were super open about everything and kind of asked for people's feedback. We did a ton of kind of beta testing before we launched anything. And most of that test group were people that we worked with and interacted with every day. We had a huge launch party at the Shopify offices, invited like as many people that we could. And that honestly helped our list start off at 500 as opposed to 0 from just that event. So we were super open about it. And I think that it also helped when we did decide to make that leap and leave our jobs, that people were really understanding and were really supportive of what we were doing too. They kind of were part of had heard us talk about it and be really excited about it in the months prior, and now too have seen that journey from when we first kind of came up with the concept to now and the traction that we've had. So I don't know. I think in hindsight, I think that was a really positive thing that we did, is to tell as many people as possible, get their feedback. And sometimes people won't tell you what they actually think, which happens too. But it is important to kind of get as many people thinking about it, talking about it as you can, I think, in the early days.
Okay. So 3 female co-founders, and you guys were kind of all in there doing everything at the beginning. Now you have a full team. At the beginning, how was it like divvying up the different tasks at hand with like 3, what sounds like 3 very smart women who probably wanted to do it all?
Yeah, it was, and it still is, like, I think figuring out who's doing what is an ongoing thing. I think we were really fortunate in that the 3 of us had very distinct kind of strengths and passions too, that lent itself well to like very different areas of the business. So I mentioned Ellen is just like the most insanely avid sports fan you've ever met, knows everything about every sport, men's and women's. So it was always, and again, that premise from that very first night was that Ellen would really shape the content and the voice of the gist. And then Rosalind, my other co-founder, is a CPA, is just like a whiz with numbers, is super analytical, is just so smart. And so Roz kind of running with a lot of the operations, data analytics, and a lot of our tech as well, even though none of us had any tech background. Roz kind of taught it all to herself, was a really natural fit and kind of natural progression as well. And then I come from the consulting side of things. So being on more of the business development, commercialization, monetization side, again, felt like a very natural fit. So we kind of fell into those roles very naturally. And then you're right, in the early days, there are many things we were doing that were not our strengths, but it was just kind of like, we had to do them. And actually, I feel like in the last year or so, as we've really expanded our team, we've been able to lean into what like gives us the most energy and like what our actual strengths are a lot more, because we don't have to do a lot of the stuff that is just really hard sometimes too when you don't have any experience or don't really know what you're doing. So but we were very fortunate to have very complementary skill sets.
Yeah, it sounds like a dream come true for like starting a business. Oh, you got someone who knows the numbers. You got someone in consultation. You've got someone who's the voice of the company. Perfect.
Totally.
Awesome.
Yeah, we were really lucky. So yeah. So
tell me about putting together the first newsletter. What had to be in there? Do you remember what was happening at the time, content-wise?
That's a good question. I actually don't remember. It was September of 2017 was when we first were doing that kind of testing period.
Yeah.
October really is a huge time for sports.
Yeah.
So, NHL season was probably starting up. Basketball is probably starting up. I can't recall exactly what was going into that newsletter, but I can say Ellen did the first draft, and Rosa, I remember reading it and being like, yeah, it's perfect. It sounds great. That's exactly what I was kind of picturing it sounding like. And I was just like, yeah. And, now when we look back, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we sent that to people. So it's, really figuring out the voice, the right tone, the right structure, and also really listening and learning from our audience has been a huge part of, I think, why we're at where we are at today. I would say, nobody else in the sports world has really tried to cater to a female fan. That just hasn't really happened. And so we tried to take a really open-minded approach and to have a relationship with our gisters where they felt like they were giving us their feedback and like, yeah, I loved this story. I didn't love this. I didn't love this subject line, this reference. I wish you guys would talk about this more, and really building that rapport with our gisters was really important. And it's still something that's really at the core of everything that we do. Like our gisters really tell us what the voice should sound like, again, what content we should be touching on, and whatnot. We'll all have like our kind of personal views, but it's really, we're doing this for our gisters and our community. And so we took and still do take that real like testing approach to everything, especially on the content side. That's really honed kind of the voice that you see today.
I want to get into some specifics from that. So two-parter. What is a piece of content that you got very strong feedback on, good or bad?
You know what? We got a ton of feedback, and we get tons of feedback on every single piece of content, I should preface with.
That's great.
Yeah, which is great. I think, again, we're talking about sports in a different way, and it really resonates with a lot of people. And sometimes it's not going to too, which is awesome when we just can start that conversation. I think it's not like a specific piece of content, but we were covering everything that was happening last June with this massive social justice movement, and particularly how athletes and female Black athletes in particular were speaking to what was happening and really amplifying their voices and really taking a stand on everything that was going on. That was what felt like a really pivotal time for us, for our content, and just kind of on where we stand on a lot of things. And that was something that we felt really frustrated by in being sports fans previously, is that, there isn't that like opinion or like line that's stated a lot of the time. There's such a lack of coverage of those more progressive storylines or progressive viewpoints. And so we got a ton of feedback, mostly positive, but certainly lost some gisters too, that, around taking more of a stance, versus I think a lot of other sports media outlets are very,
on the fence, like 1 foot over here.
Yeah. And don't want to. And whether it's like, again, with the Black Lives Matter movement, or whether it's around, all the sexual harassment or what have you that happens across the sports world, like those are things that are super important to us and are really at the core of our values, and we know are really important to our community too. And so I think as our community has grown, and as we've, again, amplified a lot of voices in the sports world a little bit more and taken more of that kind of progressive storyline, we've gotten really, really positive feedback and grown in really meaningful ways. And certainly have gotten negative feedback too, but we're kind of okay with that as well.
Yeah, it means people are engaged with the content at the end of the day. So what's something that you guys maybe have missed? There's lots of trials and tribulations, in being an entrepreneur. What's a lesson learned, maybe something you didn't cover enough of?
Oh yeah, there are so many things, honestly, Sarah. I think, I think we're a really small team. I think that people don't realize how lean and mean we are, where, most more established companies are going to have full teams that are like covering everything and really keeping track of everything 24/7. We literally just don't have the woman power and the capacity to be able to do that. So there have certainly been things that were like, oh, we should have been, more on top of that, or should have known that this was breaking or covered it more. But it's definitely tricky when you've got a pretty small team and are just a very like scrappy startup. And, again, we really do take pride in building that relationship with our gisters, where our gisters will tell us too. They're like, why aren't you guys talking about this, and this? Yeah. Which is great. And so they kind of, it's almost like this, I wouldn't say UGC by any means, but it is like, our gisters will tell us what we should be talking about. But there are many, many things that we just like haven't been able to maybe like cover in the way that we would like to.
Fair. What is one of your biggest lessons learned in general with this startup?
Yeah, I think, whether it's from kind of like the content side from the sports world, or from, getting into the financing world and kind of like fundraising around this, and being in the sports space, media space, but also kind of like the tech startup ecosystem. We are young women in this space. And so in that, and, we don't come from a sports media startup background either. And so I think we have a different way of doing things. Sometimes we have a bit of a different opinion, or just have a different kind of perspective on the kind of content that we create, the way that we're building our business. And I think that in the early days, it was really hard to navigate that and recognize. I think now I recognize that us coming in with that more diverse perspective, more diverse experience is such a competitive advantage. That's kind of why we have been successful, is because we have thought about things differently and done things differently. I think though, when you're just starting out and really smart people that are really experienced in the space are kind of like, I don't really see how this could work or what have you, and you're getting that kind of feedback, it can be really difficult. And so kind of one of the big learnings that I've definitely taken away, and that I think our co-founding team really embodies, is that, those differences. And when you feel a little bit uncomfortable or aren't sure, or feel like, you're like the only female in the room or what have you, like that's actually when you should really be leaning in and really, just thinking of those differences and that different perspective as your competitive advantage. I think that's been a huge reason, again, why like the Gist has resonated with so many people, is that it's different. So that's been a huge learning, which again, when you're kind of just starting out, is really hard to hear, because it's your baby and you feel a little bit, everything like can feel very personal. But I think taking that step back has been a big learning for us.
For sure. What was the best piece of like advice that's been given to you in your career, whether it was like business advice or otherwise?
There's been a lot. We lean on our mentors and advisors, and we've got quite just like a really, really supportive group around us that we go to for advice all the time. Which again, I think is a huge part of why we're at where we are today, because we're new to this and we have no clue what we're doing a lot of the time. And so it's been, it's so important to have those people around you to ask those questions of. I think one of the key things that stands out is kind of, and one of our mentors like really has hammered this home, where it's like your team really is everything. I think that you can have a really amazing idea, have like the perfect timing, have, all of the macro and economic trends that are in your favor, have like such an excellent business model, have such an excellent pitch. But when it comes down to it, if the team isn't cohesive, isn't in sync, isn't like fostering a certain culture and relationship that's kind of sustainable and that's like prime for growth, I just don't think you can really do it. Like you can have all the other ingredients, but if the team isn't feeling like that cohesion and that trust and relationship and like really love for one another, I think it's so difficult. And I think that's a big reason why we've had some of the success that we've had as well. Is just like us three as founders have such a strong relationship and really lean on each other. We lean on our team so much, like we're super, super collaborative, and have tried to really foster that kind of like supportive environment. It's like the people are behind really everything.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I really wanted to talk to you specifically now because Tokyo, the Olympics have just wrapped. And, I was watching the newsletters coming in. And what was your biggest takeaway from Tokyo 2020 in the female perspective?
Oh, well,
she goes,
it was amazing. It was, I don't know, I'm a huge, obviously women's sports fan, and just like the Olympics were just amazing. So I think, I don't know. I think that this Olympics really showed us just the power of women's sport. Like, honestly, I don't know what other way to put it, where it was just like, I think we saw so many amazing athletes just like, honestly, like bringing us to tears. Like it was so cool to see so many women at just like the pinnacle of athletic achievement. And, I think it is important to like remember all the barriers and sacrifices and whatnot that were there before they were able to get to this point. And just seeing the sheer number of like medals, but also just women like participating in the Olympics on Team Canada. Obviously, our women's soccer team gold medal was like an insane moment. But really across every sport, like it was just such a powerful, like, wow, this is kind of a lot of the progress too that's been made, which was really awesome to see. I think, even when we were starting the Gist, it was a very different landscape to what it is now. So it really felt Yeah, it felt like really special, honestly, I think for Canadian women in particular, just to see all those medals rolling in and to see so many women on the podium and just participating and like just in their element and at the, again, like pinnacle of their careers is just like really cool.
Mm-hmm. And there were some interesting, like, storylines there as well around mental health and team uniforms. I thought you might have an opinion on some of that.
Totally. Yeah, there was a lot going on. I think as much as it was overall, of course, just like such a positive, amazing event and again, like the progress over the past few years is astounding. The reality is like there's still so far to go. I think there are many instances leading up to the games and during that reminded us of the progress that still needs to be made. I think whether it comes to uniforms or what have you. I do think, with Simone Biles and Osaka and so many other athletes really speaking to mental health, that's kind of like exactly what the GIST is all about in many ways, where, having more diverse perspectives and more diverse people that have that attention, that have that power and that have that influence and that are, again, leaning into those differences, recognizing like, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel at my best and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to be super brave and recognize that. And, in the face of having so much incredible pressure, it's like, has that, just like that, honestly, like bravery to step outside and to do something about it and to stand up for themselves. I think is super amazing and is hopefully something that we'll only see more and more of as we see more diverse voices with that influence and platform really through sport. And I think sport is honestly super reflective of our society at large a lot of the times and is kind of those culture and societal change like builders too often does come from the sports world. So while obviously kind of difficult to see someone like Simone Biles and Osaka before the Olympics kind of going through that, I also think it's super pioneering and is going to ultimately really benefit the sports world and female athletes and BIPOC athletes in particular kind of going forward. Before
Tokyo 2020 started, what is the pep talk with your crew? What does that look like?
That's a good question. It was, we will see you all on the other side, I think. It was really crazy. And again, I'm not on the content side of things. Like, I'm not a writer, like I'm not good at any of that stuff, but our content team was really, honestly, like took it to a whole other level. And they're already have a lot going on and we've got a pretty extensive content team, but it was crazy, honestly, like with having the daily newsletters, daily podcasts, so much like around the clock social content. It was a huge undertaking. And so, I think everyone else that wasn't on the content side was kind of like, whoa, that's okay. How can we support and help out where you guys need it? But it was a super busy time. Even on the sponsorships and kind of brand partner side, we had a lot of brands we've been monetizing really efficiently too, which has been really exciting. So it was crazy. I think, again, going back to the team side of things, we always just really try to be super cognizant that like that just doesn't exist without our amazing team. And we are an all female content team too. And so, everything is about like having these more diverse voices speaking to what's happening. So just trying to make sure everyone's feeling okay, getting some sleep over the last 2 weeks was kind of the extent of the pep talk.
So everyone has 2 weeks off now, right? No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Yeah. We're trying to give everyone some breathing room now for sure.
You participated in programs with Facebook and like NBC Universal and Techstars. Now that you've gone through all that and that's sort of on the GIST resume when you're working on partnerships, what are you looking for? What are the right brand partnerships for the GIST?
Yeah, I mean, we are very careful about which partners that we work with and ensure that those partners really embody just like our values and are kind of on this journey alongside us in having an impact and leveling the playing field in sports. We're also a startup and all of our content is free. So, monetizing our content and our audience has definitely been at the core of what we're doing in honor of our growth too. I think what's really great is that there are a lot of marketers and a lot of brands that get that, we're very overdue on having some progress in this space and are really keen to work with someone like us on, again, like leveling the playing field. So yeah, we look at all different kinds of companies too. Like we've worked with the NBA and the USTA, USGA. So a lot that are in the sports world, kind of from like a league, team, organizations perspective. But, female fans are also really savvy consumers too. So we work with a lot of like direct to consumer startups. We worked with FanDuel, great way to like introduce our gisters to fantasy and the sports betting world and what that could look like. So yeah, there's a lot of different partners that we work with. I think ultimately we're always looking for partners that, again, have that kind of like shared values with us and are really on board and are very genuinely supporting female athletes, women in sports and all of that good stuff.
So in terms of content creation, and I know that you're not on that side of things, but let's just say on behalf of the Gist, you could sit down with any athlete. Who would your dream interview be? Ask them anything you want.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm a huge tennis fan. So both and like Serena, Osaka, Bianca are all I'm like completely obsessed with. So selfishly, that is and I couldn't even decide between those three. Probably still Serena. If I had to choose one, but there are so many amazing female athletes out there. We're kind of like, we're pretty open, I would say, to like, there's so many amazing athletes that are doing really great things across the W. The NWSL is just exploding too. So there are a lot of big names, but also, up and coming names that we're kind of keen to connect with and are kind of growing with too.
So in working with your team now and thinking about what's next for the Gist, the podcast, you've got the weekly newsletter. What else is cooking? Like what else might there be? I don't know how much you can say, but
yeah, no, we have a lot of ideas. I think our real vision is to be that go-to source for sports for all of the underserved sports fans out there, which opens up a lot of opportunities too. I think we've been really honing in on that voice and the content and the structure through the newsletter, through our podcast, but there are so many other kind of like new verticals that we're super interested in exploring too. We see so much opportunity. I mentioned in the kind of like gaming, fantasy, sports betting space, like nobody's really, focusing on women in that space. And so there's tons of opportunity there. College sports offer tremendous opportunity too. Us as Canadians, sometimes we're like not fully sure what's going on there, but there's so much, like such an interesting college sports world that we'd love to dive into further as well, whether that's like, through the newsletter, through a podcast, what have you, but those kind of like as a potential new vertical. I think the other side of things is just like women in sports business. That's an area that we found our gisters, a lot of them work in sports or are interested in getting into the sports world. And again, are looking for those resources and that content and that community that would make that feel a little bit more accessible to more diverse people that want to get into the sports business landscape. There's so many opportunities within the wellness space and how that intersects with sports too. So we've got lots of ideas for kind of where we can take the Gist next. Predominantly, from a content side of things, but again, there's so much opportunity when we think about new revenue streams on the community side, from an e-com and merchandise perspective. Even from kind of like events and what that will look like in a post-pandemic world too. So we've got a lot of ideas. Right now we're super focused on audience growth and really getting the Gist name out there to as many people as possible. And then also the revenue side, of course, because that's how we keep everything running.
So who is an entrepreneur that you have always looked up to, whether you know them or not?
Yeah, there are probably a lot of very famous ones, but actually the first one that comes to mind is one of our mentors and just like one of our very good friends, Maddie Crowell. He runs Get in the Loop, which is this really cool tech startup. They're based out of Kelowna, actually. And Maddie's just been, we met him in our very, very early days, I think when we just started in the Facebook program. And he didn't know really like anything about us. And we really didn't have anything, like we didn't have an audience. I think we were sending the newsletter at the time, but it was like not good, as I mentioned. But he just really believed in us from day one, and has been an incredible resource. When I mentioned people who have given advice that's really stuck with you, and really having that support network of people that you can call when you're not sure about something, or when you are sure about something and need to like be reminded to celebrate the wins. Maddie's just been a really amazing mentor and friend through all of that. So he's someone that all three of us really look up to, as well. Like like his startup is just doing incredibly well, too, but just in terms of the impact that you can have, on other entrepreneurs, as well as through your business, has been, really inspiring too. So yeah, I would say that's kind of the first person that comes to mind for sure.
Did it trip you out being named to Forbes 30 under 30?
Yeah, it was pretty surprising. Yeah, we were like, this seems like a mistake, but okay.
Like, we'll take it.
Obviously super grateful. A really amazing kind of accolade and something that's really opened up a lot of doors for us too, for sure. But yeah, we were pretty shocked.
That's awesome. Well, like, what's something that came out of that you maybe didn't see before?
Yeah, I think it really helped us in forging some of those new partnerships and just in like getting our foot in the door in a lot of ways. I think having those kinds of external validators, which honestly, getting an award like that, while obviously very rewarding, it's like, it doesn't really mean anything, like it doesn't really mean anything, like I think we've had impact in so many other ways, that are worthy of probably more recognition than something like that. But you do need, and I think especially when you're just starting out, like you really do need those kind of external validators where somebody's going to be like, oh, okay, these guys are legit. And so it really helped in just opening up those doors, whether it was to investors, whether it was to partners, whether it was honestly like in growing with subscribers, having those kinds of things. And like the Facebooks and NBC and Techstars on your docket, like we definitely have benefited from getting kind of those names and kind of accolades. It certainly has helped, especially in the early days.
So the way I like to end this podcast is by asking you three women that you think are in the media world in some way, shape, or form that need to come tell their stories on this podcast.
Okay, one that comes to mind is a journalist, Lindsay Gibbs. She runs the Power Plays newsletter predominantly, but I think she's got multiple newsletters now. But she's just an awesome, again, more like diverse, progressive voice in sports. We've promoted her newsletter many times. She's just awesome. And I love that. And again, like more progressive tack, and having that kind of opinion on everything that's going on. So Lindsay Gibbs is a really great one.
Where is she based out of?
I don't know, actually. She's in the States,
Okay.
But I'm not sure where in the States. I feel like everyone's so fluid these days too.
Yeah.
It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, she would be a really great one. There's a few too that come to mind that are like based out of Philadelphia, and we spent 6 months down in Philly, and we're kind of between Philly and New York as part of an accelerator with Techstars and Comcast. But while we were there, we met some really awesome women in the media and sports media landscape that are based out of Philly. So two in particular, one that's the kind of like side court reporter for the Sixers, or reporter, I don't know if is the right word, who's awesome. And then a few kind of radio personalities too there that were just like awesome, just like women in sports media that we just like loved while we were down there. Marissa Jennings is like the first one that immediately comes to mind, who could be super interesting as well. And then I'm sure you've probably connected with most of the team at CBC, but another one that just immediately comes to mind is our Twitter manager, actually, who has been with us from literally day one. She was one of our very first content contributors. Alexis Allison is at CBC Sports and has been there for a few years. And she's just knows everything social so well. Is just like so knowledgeable on so many different things. And yeah, has just been a really core part of our team from day one. So Lex is also amazing and would be a really great addition to the podcast.
Thank you so much for coming on. I will say the gist was my favorite during the Olympics on socials. You guys did a killer job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, our content team needs to take a nap this week, but I will pass that along. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Sarah.
And I thought learning to iron by the time I was 30 was a big achievement. To find out more about Jacie deHoop and to subscribe to the Gist newsletters or podcast, you can find the links in this episode's notes. And if you haven't subscribed to the Women in Media podcast yet on your favorite service, that would be awesome too. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, I'm Mercedes Nichol, four-time Winter Olympian and host of Dropping In, a podcast with Mercedes. This is a podcast where I interview a bunch of different people. I get the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as I share my stories along the way. Now you can drop in at droppingin.com or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I'll see you soon.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.